Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Extranet User Manager Office 365 EUM and Azure B2B webinar. It's an exciting time for us. We're actually launching a brand new release of our Extranet User Manager product, leveraging the B2B functionality that Microsoft has provided. So we're going to be taking you through, actually let me bring up my agenda here, some introductions and such, and then through some background on what B2B is, and then into some actual scenarios. We have a live demo scenario we're going to take you through, as well as some customer scenarios. I'm going to start first just by doing intros on our side here. My name is Peter Carson. I'm the president of Envision IT, the maker of Extranet User Manager. I'm also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. All my contact information is up on the slide there. We're going to be posting the slide deck up on our site following the webinar, so you can get all the details and all the contact information from there. Also on the line, I've got Dinesh Sohan, who's our Director of Products. He's in charge of the Extranet User Manager product. And Logan Guest, who runs sales on the EUM side of things. And again, all their contact information will be available in the deck as well. So in terms of what we want to cover off today, we're going to do a bit of an introduction to what extranets are first, just to level set everybody. Then we're going to dive right into Azure AD B2B. Now, B2B stands for business to business. It's really about how you collaborate from your business or organization to other partner organizations and really leverage Microsoft in the middle from an Azure AD point of view. We're then going to move into some features around our Extranet User Manager product and how that fits in with Azure AD B2B. We'll talk about governance and permissions, touch on some licensing, and we'll actually take you into a couple of demos, both our demonstration site that we use for Extranet User Manager, as well as a couple of our client sites of work in progress that we've got going on right now. So let's start just with a quick intro on what is an extranet. So, I mean, ultimately, it's a website accessible to people outside of your corporate network. So it's a way for you to share information or collaborate with your customers, your partners, your vendors, lots of different types of folks in a secure way. You know, there's some sort of authentication and authorization that happens. It's not a public website. They need to be able to come in securely. You know, it can be delivered as part of your public website. Could actually be a part of your corporate intranet that you expose externally securely, or it could be a standalone extranet. We've got customer examples that fall into all of those camps through there. So in terms of types of people that typically would come into an extranet, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different types of scenarios. You know, you may be a charitable organization or a nonprofit organization. You've got members. You're a for-profit organization that has customers. You know, any type of organization typically has vendors and suppliers, often has volunteers. You may have board of directors. You may be a government organization that wants to reach out and connect with citizens, or educational that wants to work with researchers, property management with tenants, partners in general. So, you know, the list goes on and on. Each organization is unique, but there's a lot of commonality around the types of things that we see through there. The first thing we want to do is have a look at what sort of considerations do we want to think about for an extranet. So, you know, we just saw a list of different types of people that could come into an extranet. So for your particular scenario, you know, our conversation often starts with, well, who's coming into the extranet? And does everybody see the same information? Is it a place for you to securely publish broadly information to the whole set of people? Or is there a unique site that each person comes into or each organization comes into? Is there any sort of member database that we need to interface with? Maybe you've got a CRM system like Dynamics CRM or an ERP system that we need to connect in with. Maybe you're a charitable organization, you're doing Blackbox or other fundraising types of systems you want to make that part of. And how do people discover the extranet? You know, is it invitation only where you know who you want to bring into it? Or can people self-discover it, self-register on the site, and then go through some sort of an approval process from there? And if so, you know, how does that approval process work? Who approves those new registrations? And then is it just the extranet? You know, we're typically focused on SharePoint, but really extranets can be lots of different things. There are other systems that are going to be accessing as part of that as well, either internally developed or other SaaS applications externally that you want to bring your customers into. The idea of single sign-on is a wonderful thing, not just for your staff, but also for your external users. So in terms of the technologies that we're going to focus on here today, I mean, we are a Microsoft shop, so we're going to focus in on the Microsoft solutions, and most of our extranets involve SharePoint. It's a great collaboration platform where you can publish information, you can do document collaboration, document management, all of that through there. Not to say that you have to have SharePoint in your mix. Some of our clients don't actually use SharePoint, They just use the Extranet User Manager product to allow access into other systems from there. And over the last couple of years, Office 365 has really been picking up steam. So SharePoint Online being part of Office 365, that's their cloud-hosted version of SharePoint. That's an obvious target as well for building an extranet. You don't want to build a whole, DMZ in your data center and a bunch of servers to host your extranet. You can have Microsoft do all that for you and host it in Office 365. Or you could actually build that infrastructure yourself and host it in the cloud in Microsoft Azure, which is their infrastructure as a service. We actually leverage that ourselves. So if you want to use our Extranet User Manager product and not have to install it on your servers, we can host it for you up in Azure as part of that and manage it for you. And of course, we're going to be touching more into what our Extranet User Manager product is. Okay, so I want to start with just a little background on external sharing in Office 365. Because that's really our focus here today. It's building an extranet in Office 365 using SharePoint Online. And there is a concept that's been there for a couple of years now called Office 365 external sharing. And it is a way that you can share either individual documents or sites with external users through your Office 365 tenant. And one of the nice things here is it's unlimited. You can invite as many, literally tens of thousands or more users into your Office 365 subscription and not have to pay for those external users. You only pay for your staff that are going to be using the portal. They do have to come in through the Microsoft login form. They have to have a Microsoft account, like a Hotmail or an Outlook.com or Microsoft.com, or actually be an Office 365 subscriber themselves in order to come in. If they don't have that, it's fairly easy and free for them to create an account, but it is an additional step for them to come in. One of the key things, though, is from a governance point of view, that owners need permission rights to invite the users in. This can really create a lot of challenges from a governance perspective. That ideally, you don't want your owners to be managing permissions in SharePoint. That can get out of hand. When you get a large organization, a lot of different sites with permissions managed all over the place by lots of different people, it quickly becomes difficult to understand, well, who actually has access to what, and do they have the right access in there? So that's a concern from that point of view. So it is a bit more of a lightweight solution from an external sharing point of view. Now, more recently, Microsoft has announced Azure Active Directory Business to Business. Now, this is still in preview, so it's not a full general availability product. I'm not sure exactly what the timelines is around the GA launch for B2B, but it is something that you can use. It's available in all the tenants, and basically it's a simple way for you to invite your partners into your Azure AD. And the partners use their own existing Azure AD account if they have one, or it takes them through an onboarding process to create their own Azure AD tenant, kind of behind the scenes. They don't see the complexities of that. They're just creating an account, setting a password, and managing that behind the scenes through Azure AD. And you can manage all your permissions through Azure AD groups, which I really like. I'm a big fan of role-based access control, where we say, okay, we're going to manage permissions through groups. We're not going to let a lot of people manage the permissions, but we will let a lot of people manage the membership of those groups. And that's a nice balance to strike in your organization around a Wild West of everybody can do everything versus, okay, we don't want it so locked down that any request has to come through central IT. Now, once you've set sites up and you've set the groups up, you let the business owners own those groups and manage those permissions from there. Now, it's also very secure. You're controlling all access through your Azure AD. You can remove your partners, so if you decide, that person shouldn't come into our extranet anymore, you can remove them from your Azure AD, and their access is revoked from your extranet. The other side that's really nice, though, is that when a partner leaves a partner organization, it's going to be up to that partner organization to deactivate their account on their side, which they're going to be very motivated. I mean, every organization, when somebody leaves, the first thing they do is shut down that person's AD account, so the former employee doesn't have access to the company they were working for. But because they use those same credentials to come into your portal, it shuts down access to your portal as well. So it's nice because you don't have these sort of orphan accounts where you've created a partner account for a user in an organization who's since left that organization, but they may not tell you that, you may not know, and that particular user can continue to access your site through there. You don't really want that to happen. So that really puts the onus back on the partner organization and leverages off what they're going to do to shut down that access. Now, I mentioned you don't need to have Azure AD, and the partner company will set it up for you. If you do have your own Azure AD, though, it actually makes it a much nicer single sign-on experience. If you've had experience in Office 365 working with multiple tenants, where you're signing into different tenants with different users, you'll know the grief of in private windows or incognito where you have to keep different browser windows open for different sessions because you can only sign in as one user in one browser at one time into Office 365. Because they're using their partner account to do that, they can log into their own corporate portal in Office 365 and then link across into yours, not even have to sign in again, not have to open another browser window. It's all very seamless from that point of view. So a really big fan of that single sign-on experience from that perspective. So, I mean, we've talked a fair bit already about Office 365, but if we get deeper into the integration between Azure AD B2B and Office 365, once you've invited them into your Azure AD, you can then grant them access to any part of your SharePoint Online. And these are still considered external users. So just like that external email sharing feature that we were talking about in SharePoint Online, when you bring users in through Azure AD this way, they are considered external users and they don't require an Office 365 subscription for that. So that's a big benefit. I mean, the previous versions of Extranet User Manager, we supported Office 365, but we did it in a way that those weren't considered external users by Microsoft. So a big licensing issue there. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of customers keen to adopt that, other than some charitable organizations that didn't actually pay for their licenses. So this is a big win for us to be able to leverage that licensing model. So you can apply permissions not only to the individual users, but to the Azure AD groups that they belong to. So, and then ultimately, we'll talk more about Extranet User Manager and how you can delegate management of those Azure AD groups through our product. Now, there are different flavors of Azure AD. There's a free, a basic, a premium, now a premium 2 flavor through there. I think we're going to see some licensing coming for external users from Microsoft around that. I mean, part of the idea is that, yes, they're going to get basic access coming in, but if they want premium access in Azure AD, things like multi-factor authentication, I think those are still further down the pipeline. We're probably going to see some costs associated for those external users under that. But if they want to just come in as a regular basic Azure AD user, should be no additional licensing costs from that perspective. So what are some of the limitations around Azure B2B today? I mean, it's new, it's in preview, it's still evolving from Microsoft. We've got Microsoft Ignite coming up next week, so we're keen to see, if there's any announcements coming around Azure B2B there and what's changing from that perspective. But as of today, there's some fairly significant limitations. I haven't listed them all out here. I put a link at the bottom that goes across to an Azure article that talks about the current preview limitations. But the big ones that I saw, the first one being that you have to be an Azure Global Administrator in order to invite people in through B2B. And that's a big stopper because this is typically a very select group of people. It's a highly privileged role in Azure AD, so it's not something that you're going to grant to your general business users and say, hey, go ahead, invite people in, because once you've given them those keys, they can basically do anything in Azure, and they could delete VMs, they could do all sorts of weird and wonderful things that you're not going to want them to do. So you're typically not going to give them that sort of access. So it really doesn't lend itself to delegation today. And even once you get into the Azure portal, it's not a particularly user-friendly experience today. You have to upload in a particular CSV format and do the invitations through that method. There's no sort of friendly web interface for doing that. There's also no self-registration or approval process around that. So that's more from a user experience point of view. The other caveat to be aware of is that currently consumer email addresses are specifically blocked, actually. So if you have a Hotmail or a Gmail account, you can't invite that kind of user in through B2B. It is business to business, so it's specifically targeting, not supporting consumer email addresses. Again, that may change in the future, we're not sure, but today that's something that you need to be aware of. What is your target audience that's going to be coming into your extranet? Is it people with sort of official business professional email addresses, or is it going to be consumers? If it's consumers, this is maybe not the fit for you right now from that point of view. And there's no integration to other line of business systems. I mean, you can always build that yourself, but things like profile management, some of the CRM integration that we've done, account verification rules as part of the self-registration is something that's not there out of the box. So that leads us to the Extranet User Manager. Let's first just talk about what the product is. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's really around that delegation of user management. That's its main goal, to say, okay, we want people to be able to self-register, to go through approvals processes. Some of the things like forgotten password reset obviously don't apply if we're doing Azure B2B because we're not actually going to be doing the login process. I mean, we still support that, particularly if you're running an on-premise SharePoint environment or you're coming into on-premises resources. But from a B2B point of view, it's really around that user management side. We can delegate that down to the business. We can allow the business owners to invite people in, or to even have self-registration and approvals happening through that. So if we look at how that works together with B2B, I mean, as I mentioned, we're providing that self-registration, profile management, and delegation. So as the business are creating these users, in the background they're getting uploaded into Azure AD. So we're still using that same portal. In fact, I'm going to show you how we automate that and how that works today. And then Azure AD is responsible for sending out the invitations and managing the login process. In the future, I'm hoping maybe we can call an API to Microsoft and get the invitation and send it out ourselves. Today, we're not able to do that. So again, we'll see what the roadmap is on the Microsoft side and where that goes. But right now, I think we've still got a great solution from that perspective. You can do some minimal customizations to the invitations through Azure AD itself, so you can still provide a brand and experience through there. And then Extranet User Manager manages the group membership. So under the hood, when we're managing groups, we're actually managing membership in the Azure AD groups that you can then grant permissions in SharePoint Online to. So it's a nice fit there that the end business gets to use EUM, very friendly tool for creating the users, inviting them in, managing what groups belong to, which ultimately decides what permissions they have in the site. And then Azure AD provides the single sign-on experience through the Azure AD. Okay, what I'd like to do for a second here is take a quick break. Just do a quick poll of the attendees that we've got in the session here. So let me open my polls up. And the first one I want to do is just get a sense of which version of SharePoint people are currently using. So you can take a second, just answer back. You can multiple select if you're using, say, both Office 365 and SharePoint 2013. Mark them both off through there. So I'll leave that open for a bit more, just to give people a chance to respond there. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll share that back with everybody just so we can see what does the attendee demographics look like from that point of view. So let me close that and share it back. So not surprisingly, lots of people on the call in Office 365. I mean, that's our topic of interest. So I'd be surprised if we didn't see those sorts of numbers in there. Equal numbers, though, on SharePoint 2013. So I'm thinking people are running both environments or are starting to get into hybrid. A couple folks on 2016 and a few folks still back on 2010, 2007. I mean, the focus here is on 365. In the future, part of our roadmap is to actually support on-premises SharePoint through the B2B model as well. There's some interesting things with Azure application proxy and EUM fitting together that we're working on there. So stay tuned on that side. But really for the balance of today, we're going to be focused on the 365 side of things. And then one more quick poll today. Just within those environments, whichever they are, I want to get a sense of how people are using SharePoint today. Is it from a traditional document management collaboration point of view? Are you doing web publishing for your intranet? Do you have an existing extranet on your site? Or are you actually doing a public-facing website? Not something you can do in Office 365, but you can certainly do it in SharePoint 2013, 2016. So again, I'll give you 10, 15 more seconds to respond back there, and then we'll just share those results back in. Okay, let me close that one. Share that. So not surprisingly, internal collaboration being up at the top. I mean, that's where a lot of people first start their journey in SharePoint. It's just from a pure team site document management point of view. About 2/3 from an intranet perspective, which again, not surprising. SharePoint is a very popular intranet platform. About 2/3 also using it from an extranet point of view as well. So I guess, bearing in mind the audience we have here, people are very curious about extranets, hence the interest in today's topic. So thanks everybody for providing that feedback. Let's come back to our presentation deck. So what I want to talk on now is just briefly go into a couple different scenarios from an extranet perspective. So as we were looking at those poll results, collaboration versus publishing versus extranets, we kind of think about two types of extranets. One we call a secure publishing portal. It tends to have the publishing features turned on in SharePoint, and it's about rich web content management publishing, but not anonymously. You want people to be able to sign in and come in securely through that. The other being more of a collaboration space where we just need to spin up, say, team sites to be able to collaborate on documents with external partners and such, is the other common scenario that we see through there. Now, we often see both of those blended together in one portal. You may see part of your extranet more of a formal publishing portal, and then another part more of a collaboration space. And again, where that lives, it could be on-premise in SharePoint Server, it could be up in the cloud in Office 365, which will be our focus here today. Likewise, with Extranet User Manager, you can install that on-premise, or as I mentioned, we can host that up in Azure for you. So, I mean, quite often we find that clients who are going to the cloud for Office 365, it's just kind of logical to keep EUM in the cloud in Azure as well, and that way you have no on-premises infrastructure as part of your extranet. It depends, though, if you're tightly coupled into on-premises systems and as part of your user management, maybe you've got an on-premise CRM or ERP or other systems that you want to tie into, that could swing things the other direction. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about some of the features in Extranet User Manager. So of course, one is brand. Branding is very important, maintaining your corporate brand throughout the entire user experience. Right from registration through all end user pages, profile pages, ultimately the emails that are coming through as part of that whole process. Self-registration is a big deal. Most of our clients, I would say, have some sort of self-registration as part of their project. And the way we've built our product is this registration project. It's actually its own separate Visual Studio project. So we can highly customize that depending on the requirements of the client. And when we build custom workflows for approvals in there, we can integrate back-end systems into it and make a very unique self-service page as part of that. In fact, if we look at some of our client sites, we just open up a couple of sites here. So I'm going to start with my favorites, Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. This one's actually a couple years old now, still actively being used. Bilingual site, so it's English and French. It has a public-facing website component to it, hosted in SharePoint. If I go into the members area of the site, it takes me to a login form, and I can come down into the registration from there. This registration is a fair bit different than our default out-of-the-box one. It doesn't have a lot of address, phone number type of information in there. It's really just name and email, and then the main focus they want to capture is what's your relationship to the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. Their approval process is a little interesting because it actually takes an approver email. So you actually define who you want to approve you. And that at first glance might seem a little odd, but the idea is this is a members portal. Any member should be able to let anybody else in. So if you know somebody who already has an account, maybe you're working with them at one of the clubs, you can name them. They have to be able to log in to approve you, so we know that, yes, somebody who's confirmed in the system has confirmed you, and then you can continue that process. So you can build very organically from there. Another one for Kinross Gold, global company. They've got about 6,000 different suppliers around the world that work with them, and this portal is around managing those relationships with those suppliers. So very branded experience. If I come into the Register Now link, I have to start out by saying, okay, what company do I work for? We're actually doing a live lookup into their J.D. Edwards, and later I'm going to need my full J.D. Edwards number to complete the registration process as I go through there. Since we're a supplier to them, we're in their system, and then it goes through a multi-step registration process. This particular one, much of the development was actually done by Kinross. So we provided all the source code. They built the project out from there. If we look at another one, sorry, I need a couple more windows open here. Hence the problem with in private sessions. If I go to ocas.sharepoint.com, they are a charitable association. So they're an umbrella association that sits on top of the 50-odd societies across the province of Ontario for children's aid. So if I come into the registration off of their login form, they are in Office 365. They're not using the B2B yet. We actually launched this one early in 2016. I pick what organization I belong to, and the system will actually auto-populate. If I say I'm Children's Aid Society of Toronto, for example, it knows all the address information. And if I register with an email address associated with Children's Aid Society of Toronto, it'll auto-approve my account. If I pick other and put something else in, it'll go through a manual approval where an email will get sent to the person who's responsible for the registration. They approve it, and then I can be onboarded from there. So you can see a lot of different flavors to how that registration process works. This idea of delegation is a common theme. We want the business owners themselves to be able to manage who's coming into their different sites within the extranet, that they're not dependent on, beholden to IT to manage those accounts. We want it to be something that we can delegate securely, not just within our organization, but even external to our organization itself. I didn't go all the way through on the Kinross one, but when you register as a new supplier, you actually become the administrator for that supplier, and then you can approve and bring in other people from your organization. They actually delegate not just within their organization, but outside to the external organizations themselves. And we have some security rules that we can turn on within our product that you configure to do things like, okay, group owners who may be external to the organization can't see users from other groups. So, supplier A doesn't get to see supplier B's staff that are coming into the Kinross portal. The site is fully adaptive, so all of the end user pages are built using the Bootstrap CSS framework. So whether we're on a smartphone, a tablet, or full desktop, the experience tailors nicely across that whole experience. So if I come over to, let me see, which window do I want to be in? I'm going to come to our actual demo version here. Bear with me a sec. There we go. So this is our out-of-the-box registration form that I'm bringing up right now. I just want to show you that on different sizes. Oh, of course, it just blew up on me. Hang on. Demo gods. So this is actually Associated Engineering's registration. It's still the out-of-the-box. All we've done so far is do a branding on it. This site hasn't actually gone live. This is a dev site that I'm going to be using later in the session. But we can see here, if I pull the size of the browser down, I've taken it right down to a smartphone size. Our menu has become the hamburger menu. All of our fields are stacked up vertically through there. Even though there's a fair number of fields to go through on the registration process, it's still quite manageable to do that on a smartphone. If I pull that a little wider, now I'm on a tablet view. I've got my full menu back. It's widened out the view a little bit more. And then if I go all the way back up to desktop, now we've gone to a two-column layout from there. So nice adaptive framework that we've got working in there. I mentioned already, we can host it in Azure. It can go on premises. The actual requirements are quite minimal. You don't need SharePoint to install our product onto. It only needs to install into an IIS server. You can, if you choose to, put it on your SharePoint server. We generally recommend actually that people put it on its own separate standalone server. Just keeps things clean from that point of view. In the Azure environment, you can do that yourself, or we can host it for you. We basically have a multi-tenant environment that we manage. We've got a third-party organization that provides 7/24 monitoring and remediation against that. So that gives you some peace of mind from that point of view. It is multilingual. I was showing you some of the English-French pages that we went through there. We've had clients translated to many different languages. Kinross in particular, I think, went into about half a dozen different languages as part of the product. So we provide resource files, which makes it easy to translate and update the text that you see on the end user pages. Okay, so I want to come to the topic of governance and permissions. This is an important topic as you're planning out what your extranet should look like. Governance is something you hear a lot in SharePoint projects. It's something that should be a big part of any Office 365 project, and it's really about defining roles and responsibilities. It's not just who's allowed to do something, but why you should do something and what's the process around that, who should approve that and such. Permissions are a key part of that. And I mentioned previously, letting everybody manage permissions can become a real mess. I mean, we've seen SharePoint sites, not necessarily extranets, where lots of different cooks in the kitchen and permissions are all over the map, and it becomes quite the puzzle to untangle, to unwind all that. So you want to make sure you get out ahead of that and have some strong governance in front of your project before you get down into that situation. So if we think about permissions in particular, I mean, that's not all of governance, but it's a key part of it. Permissions can be applied at any level in SharePoint. We can apply them at the site, the list of the library, the folder, or even down at the item level. And in general, we really encourage our clients to only apply permissions at the top two levels. Either lock a site down or a list or library within a site. When you get into folder and item level, yes, you can do it, but that's typically where things can get quite confusing and can get a little out of hand from that perspective. So if you can build your information architecture to avoid those situations, that's generally a good thing. And then in terms of how you apply permissions, I mean, you can just apply permissions directly to a user to an object in SharePoint, but we really recommend that you use groups for that. And groups can mean a lot of different things. You know, SharePoint has its own groups. There's actually groups in Office 365. There's the Azure AD groups, which may be just a cloud-only group, or it could be a group that corresponds to an on-premise Active Directory that got synced up, or it could be a group that we created through EUM. So there's lots of different ways you can create groups. You kind of need to decide what works well for our organization. And for extranets, we find that EUM groups work really well because you're going to use our tool to invite the users in and approve them. You might as well use the exact same tool to manage the groups that those users are in. And it's one place for the business owners to go in order to do that. So if we think about permissions and group membership, those are two different roles and responsibilities. So who manages permissions really should be different than who manages group membership. If you want to tightly control the permission side of it, you want to be pretty loose with who gets to own groups and who can invite people in the groups. You really want the business to be able to own that. And that's what our approach and our tool is all about. So how does this all work from a licensing point of view? You know, if you've seen something interesting here and you want to move forward, okay, how do I actually buy Extranet User Manager? So there's two versions, there's two ways it's deployed. There's a standard and an enterprise version. I should probably put the caveat out here right now. From a B2B point of view, really all you need to concern yourself with is the standard edition. The only difference between the two was that the enterprise is when you're on premise and we're going to be authenticating to multiple different sites, providing single sign-on. That's what we consider to be the enterprise edition. That doesn't really apply in B2B, at least not today. As we get further down the road with our roadmap and some of the Azure AD application proxy and being able to light up single sign-on to on-premises stuff, we may see that being our enterprise version from a cloud perspective. But right now, just look at the 8,000 standard edition. That's really the approach there. And then there's a 20% annual software assurance fee for that. If you want us to host that for you, it's just a straight $850 a month, a monthly subscription from that. That covers your Azure costs, the licenses, the software assurance, support, everything else is all rolled in as part of that. So we published all the pricing details up on our website. You can go to the link there to see the full details from that point of view. We've got lots of different clients. We've been selling our product for a number of years now, probably 6-7 years in sort of a bespoke type of solution. About 3-4 years ago is when we started packaging it up as a separate shrink-wrapped product that we were selling. So clients across the not-for-profit, government, manufacturing, education, healthcare, real estate, financial, lots of different industry verticals, clients around the world that are using the product. And this list is growing all the time. We're adding new clients at a fairly good pace. So what I'd like to do now, we're just past the halfway mark through the session, is take you through a couple of different demos. So the first one I'm going to do is with our Envision IT demo site. Then I'm actually going to take you through the associated engineering and another one that we're doing for Wilfrid Laurier University, give you a sense of what we're doing for some of the client work. Quick pause for a water break. Okay. So I'm going to be brave here today, and I'm going to try something I've never done before, which is we're going to actually open up the registration to all of you folks that are on the line here and have everybody actually go through that. And the goal is to see, anybody that's willing to participate, we can actually go through the approval process. You'll get emails from Microsoft, and you should be able to actually come into our demo site as part of that. Let me get the full URL to the registration page that we want to use for that. Oh, I think I may crash and burn on that because that's supposed to be this page here that wasn't working for me. Let me just try that in a new window and see if that works any better for me. I don't think so, though. Nope. Okay, so we're going to have to do the registration not as a wide open, and we'll use the associated engineering to go through that. Actually, what I'll start with is I'll take us through an invitation process rather than a registration process, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. So right now, I'm in the Extranet User Manager web console, and this is where you go as an IT person managing the system, but also as a business owner to be able to invite and manage users coming into your extranet. Depending on who you are, you see different features in the site. I'm logged in as what's called a configuration editor, so I get to set email templates, set up all the Office 365 configuration, all the techie kind of stuff is there. If I was just a group owner who was going to invite some people into my site, all I would see is the search user, add user, and import user. Those are the only things I would be able to do through there. So let's actually go through the add user process. So if I put in a user through here, I'm just going to use one of my test accounts. I don't need to fill all the information in, and these fields can change depending on what your business requirements are. If you've got extra fields that you don't see here you want to add in, there's some that you want to remove out, we can completely customize what that look and feel looks like through there. I'll just grab the email address and I'll use that as a username. And what I want to do is make this an Azure B2B user. So this is saying I want to upload this user into Azure and have them log in through their own Azure AD credentials. Now, I mentioned a fair number of times groups are a big part of it. I need to decide what group I'm going to put this user into, or groups. I can have multiple groups that I make that person a member of. I'm just going to put them in the EUM_SharePoint group. And that gives them rights into the Office 365 site that we want to manage with that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this record. I'm really not having luck. I think I left my window open too long. Let me try that quickly one more time. Okay, so right now what it's doing is just adding a record into the EUM database itself. So it hasn't actually done anything with Azure AD just yet. What I have to do is, normally we set up a scheduled job to do this. I actually left it not scheduled just so I could take people through that process. I'm going to come over to one of my other windows here. So this is back on our server. This would be running behind the scenes. You wouldn't normally see this. I'm actually going to run the scheduled job that looks for new users and uploads them up into Azure. And I am on the wrong one because I was changing my demo. Oh, no. Sorry, bear with me again. Let me pull up that user I just created. It actually set them to the wrong status. I set them as an active user, which actually creates an on-premise account for that user. So I want to deactivate them first, take them out of that, and then come back in. Oh, I don't show deactivated by default. There I am. And I can make that an Azure B2B user. All right, let's go ahead and save that this time. All right, so if I come back to my console, give that a try again. So now it sees there's a new user there, and you can see it's actually driving the Azure AD portal. It's logging in, it's creating the CSV file that normally the global administrator would have to create and upload, and it's uploading it for you. So again, you would never see this. This is all running in the background, but I wanted to make it very transparent so people could see how this was all working behind the scenes. So it's just about to upload the CSV file. There it goes. Processing it. And then once it's done, it's actually going to sign out of the Azure AD portal, and it's all set. Boom. Now my user is up in Azure AD, and I get an invitation from Microsoft to be able to come into that site. Let me have a look at my inbox here. And I've got a new invitation from Microsoft here saying, hello, Peter Carson 2. So that's the name I registered with, or I invited in. Envision IT has invited you to their application, and I click this link, and it'll take me through the process in Azure AD to connect that up into my tenant. Now, I've already done it on this account before, so I won't be able to click in on this particular link through there, but that gives you a sense of how that works. And then ultimately, I'm going to end up back in one of of my many windows here. This site here, which is our umdemo.sharepoint.com site through here. And we'll see the new user show up through there. In fact, if I come into my admin console, I can actually show you under the hood. So if I look at my users in here, you'll see all these users with the #ext pound. That shows that those users were external users that have come in, registered on the site, and they're authenticating through their own Azure AD. In fact, I can see a number of my Peter Carson ones through here as well. So they're showing as unlicensed. That's not a problem because these are external users. I don't need to actually license those users. And then I can decide what rights I want to grant them through the SharePoint site itself. So if I look at my site settings and my permissions, we can see that this EUM SharePoint group here is actually a domain group because it's coming from Azure AD. That's actually the group that we created through EUM and we made users of. So anybody who's a member of that group automatically gets read access into this portal. So once the site's been set up and created for you, you don't need to then do anything with the permissions. You just come into the EUM tool and manage what groups they belong to. So I literally come in and say, okay, I'm going to search a particular user, bring up that Peter Carson 2 user, make them a member of a different group, and lo and behold, they have the appropriate permissions there in SharePoint from there. Or I can take the other perspective and say, okay, I want to actually look from a group's point of view. There's that EUM SharePoint group, and I can see all the members. I can add and remove members from that, and I can define owners for the group as well. So if I want to grant ownership of this group to somebody in the business, so they get to decide who the users that are going to be coming in, they're able to do that through this tool. Now, if they've got a bulk set of users that they want to load up, they can still do an import. So they can pull down a CSV file, fill it in with all the user information, browse that, upload it, they go through a validation step, and then it'll activate all those users. And you can set all those users to be Azure B2B as part of that upload process. Now we also have, I mentioned different roles in here. We were talking about from a group owner point of view, only being able to manage users and what groups those users belong to. We also have a concept called group editor. So in addition to the users, they would also see the group features in here as well. So they would be able to add and edit groups as well. They still wouldn't see all the configuration options, but it gives them a higher elevation role through there. Okay, so that's our first demo that we wanted to walk through. The next one is actually on the associated engineering side. So as an organization, Associated Engineering is about 1,000 staff. I think it's about 23 offices across Canada, and they do large engineering construction projects. So as you can imagine, there's often a lot of different parties involved with those. They may have a construction consortium of a dozen different companies where they're the project lead, and they need to provide a place for all those different vendors to be able to work together on these massive multi-year, multi-billion-dollar projects. So Office 365 seemed like a very good candidate from that perspective. They were using SharePoint on-premise. In fact, they still are. They're just in the process of transitioning into SharePoint Online. But they had some concerns around disaster recovery, around high availability and such. To address those in their on-premise environment was going to cost a lot of dollars. By moving into SharePoint Online, they could address those because Microsoft takes ownership for that. They provide the geo-replication, they provide the high availability, the disaster recovery, all as part of the subscription for Office 365. But they needed a way to bring those external parties in as part of that project. So what we've done is layered our Extranet User Manager product on top of their SharePoint implementation. So if we come over to this window here, we've only just started the actual SharePoint side of the project the last little while. So we've got a light branding that we put together for their SharePoint Online tenant. This is still their development tenant that we're in right now. So we've got their logo in there, we've got their color theme in there. One of the things we do from a branding point of view is try and keep our changes very minimal so that we're not impacted by future changes that Microsoft does in Office 365. And said, okay, now we want to have some governance not only around the permissions and the group management, but also around the creation of sites themselves. So we want a process for actually requesting a new project site. So where they're spinning up a new project for a new client, how do they do that? Well, we want to make that very easy to go through. So we've got a site collection called sites/projects that we're going to create all these project sites in, but we needed an easy way for them to actually request those sites. So if we come back here, now what we've done so far, we just built the back-end API for building this out. The idea is that ultimately there will be a form that any associated engineering staff member can come to say, I would like a new site. They fill that form out, it goes through an approval process, and then it creates the site. But it also creates the Extranet User Manager group. It assigns all the permissions, the ownership, wires all that together for them. In fact, I've got the creation information here. Let me just go say, okay, I'm going to create a site called Demo3. And under the hood, I want to create a group called Demo3 Readers. That's an group. And I want to make myself, my username is P. Carson, as an owner of that group. So if I go ahead and submit that, right now we're using Swagger, which is a development workbench for testing out our APIs. Longer term, and I'll show you a form that we're developing for Wilfrid Laurier University for the same purpose through here. So it's creating an Extranet User Manager group. It's creating a site in Office 365. It's granting the correct permissions in the site to that group, and it's granting me ownership of the group. So at the end of the day, I've got my brand new project site all set up for me, ready to go, and I've got a group in Extranet User Manager that I own, and I can invite people in and start collaborating, and away I go from there. It's a very seamless process for people to be able to create new sites, but it allows some control around there in terms of what styles are those new sites, what templates are being used, what are the steps being used to create them, and make sure that that's done in a consistent, coherent way. So if I come back to the Associated Engineering Extranet User Manager, so if I do a search on groups, I can see there's actually a Demo3 Readers group there that's now being created. That got created through that process, and me as P. Carson got set as a user for the group. There's no members in it yet. I need to invite people in before I can start collaborating with it, but the wiring is all there from that point of view. And then if I come over to the Associated Engineering site itself, if I refresh this view here, we'll see now there's a new demo site 3 that was created about a minute ago. I go ahead and click on that link, and I'm now in that new demo 3 site. So if I look at the permissions for that site, we can see there's that Demo3 Readers group, and it's been granted read access in the site. So all the governance, all the work around how a site should be created and how permissions should be done in it is all automated and managed through that process. So if we switch one more time to my other browser here, let's actually bring up the Laurier site. So we're actually building a staff portal and extranet for Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, university of about 30,000 students, so a pretty sizable organization. And again, they want the ability to create or to request the creation of new sites, but have some process and workflow around that. So we've started working down through Nintex. We haven't 100% decided whether they're going to be purchasing Nintex for broader purposes. We thought, what, let's use that as the beginning process here. So I can start by saying I want to create a new site request. It's just a SharePoint list that we're using to manage the process. And it brings up the site provisioning form. So I can fill in, what's the title and URL of my site that I want to create, which template do I want to use for it, and then what permissions do I want to provide? Which groups do I want to create? I can add new rows in the form here to define that out. What existing groups maybe do I want to grant permissions to, and go ahead and save that. And at that point, what happens, we haven't built it out fully yet, is that we use an Nintex workflow to pick that up. To say, okay, do we need to go through an approval process? How do we route that request? Is it different depending on where the site was being requested for? Get the approval from it, and then the Nintex workflow can actually call out to our API to say, okay, now go do all that work. Go create the site, go create the groups, assign all the permissions, wire all that together. So it becomes a very nice end-to-end solution through that whole process. All right, so let me come back to my PowerPoint deck here. So I've taken you through the demo scenario. Just to close things out from here, a couple of housekeeping notes. From a next steps point of view, if what you've seen is of interest and you'd like to move forward, I mean, we are launched and released with the B2B version, so it's up and available on our website. So if you go to our extranetusermanager.com site, let me just pull that up. Come into support and releases, and you'll see there's our new release that just launched the end of last week. It has all the B2B support in there. You can download it. You will need to sign in first. So if you haven't created an account on your site, on our site, simply click the link, go through the registration process, create your account, sign in, and then you'll be able to pull down the download from there. There's also full documentation in there as well. So all of the support documents around prerequisite guides before you install, the deployment configuration guide, those are all available there as well. Again, you need to be signed in order to access the product documentation. So have a look through. There's a lot of content there. As I mentioned, all of our pricing information is up on the site as well. So we've got the standard and enterprise edition. Really just focus on the standard if you're thinking about the B2B side of things, or the hosted standard. We also provide technical support and custom consulting as part of our projects as well. And then if you're interested in trials, there's a couple of different ways that we can do trials through here as well. So you can do a hosted solution. If you're thinking about B2B, this is actually the quickest way to get up and running. Basically what we do is we set up in our multi-tenant environment a trial version of the software dedicated just to you. And then if you've got a sandbox Office 365 that you want that connected to, work with us and we can wire that up so it'll actually integrate in with your Azure AD and your Office 365. You may not want to do that with your production one if it's just a proof of concept, but if you have a dev tenant or a trial tenant, feel free to do that. You can also install on premises, so you can download and install yourself. And we also have a premium trial service where we basically go through the installation for you. There's a $500 fee for the premium trial, but we refund that against a license purchase. So if you have questions about any of that, by all means, reach out to Logan. He's your point of contact from a trial point of view. Doing a deeper technical demo, we can do a one-on-one session with you, or any more sort of product information from there. In terms of other things we've got going on, I'm actually going to be speaking, if you're local in the Toronto area, at the Toronto SharePoint Users Group meeting tomorrow night. This is about the new SharePoint Framework Developer Preview. Microsoft announced, I guess about a month ago or so. You know, we're pretty keen on it. It aligns pretty closely with where we've been going from a development point of view the last year or two. If anybody's down at Microsoft Ignite next week, we don't have a booth down there, but myself and one of my colleagues is going to be at Ignite for the full week. So reach out if you want to connect up, just from an ad hoc point of view. Love to talk more from that perspective. The talk I'm giving tomorrow night down at the users group, I'm actually going to be doing as a webinar the week after Ignite. Probably have some tidbits from Ignite as part of that as well. And then again, participating in a panel down at SharePoint Users Group mid-October, basically recapping various different MVPs, feedback and thoughts from what's come out from Microsoft Ignite. If you are an MVP yourself, I'm going to be out at the MVP Global Summit in Seattle, November 7th to 10th, and then doing two conferences the first full week in December. So SP TechCon, the Monday to Wednesday down in San Francisco, and then SharePoint Fest in Chicago, the Thursday, Friday, December 8th, 9th. So lots of opportunities to connect. We'll likely have more events. We're looking to do some more webinars as well through the fall. We just haven't firmed up exactly the schedule around that. So have a look at our events and news pages on our EUM page. You'll get all the full details there. A couple of links. So as I mentioned, we'll be putting the deck up both on our envisionit.com and our extranetusermanager.com sites. So you can get the recording of this as well as the presentation deck. I've got a couple of the links from a Microsoft point of view in there as well, and that pretty much wraps it up. I haven't been watching questions. I don't know, Dinesh and Amanda, if there's any specific ones that we want to take a minute before we wrap up on.
There's no outstanding questions, Peter.
Okay, very good. Well, if there's nothing more, I'll give everybody a couple minutes back, and I want to say thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to working with you all from an extranet and a B2B point of view. Have a great rest of your day. Bye now.